to sleep here. So I want to thank you very much for the kind introduction. This is my first visit to the Distinguished Scottish Rite Temple. It's really it's a humbling experience. I'd like to thank the most worshipful John L. Cooper III for inviting me down here, and I want to thank your senior grand senior warden, the Right Worshipful David Perry, for instigating all of this. James Banta, your Assistant Grand Secretary of the Grand Lodge of California, for taking care of all the details. It's kind of nerve-wracking when you're doing this. And of course, I came down with my friend Craig McMillan, who's the past master of Napa Valley Lodge number 93. Craig and I worked together last night. We at the St. Helena football games. I do the announcing, and Craig runs the clock. And I have the easiest job, that's for sure. But he's a great guy, and has done a lot for St. Helena. So later on, you're going to hear some experts speak about Earl Warren, a man who truly, in my opinion, changed America. And I'm going to sit here and talk about Papa Warren, a grandfather who changed a young man's life. My name is Jeffrey Earl Warren. Being named after a public figure is both a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing because you get to meet people you wouldn't ordinarily meet. You get doors open for you. You can go places you wouldn't ordinarily go. It's a curse, especially as a kid. You know, you're a teenager. You don't want to be different. You don't want to stand out. There's also expectations of what you should do, and so it's a bit of a two-edged sword. But I certainly came down on the former as opposed to the latter. On my father's deathbed, Jim Warren, he said to me, "Hop along." That's what he called me, Hop along, Cassidy. You have to keep the name alive. Don't let him ever forget. So that's why it's really a great pleasure that I'm permitted to tell a few tales about Papa Warren to a group which meant so much to him and had such an impact on his life. Now, I can tell you, as a young boy, before I knew about Masons, what we loved were the Shriners. As our house, the basement was filled with fezzes. We had them all around, and we'd put them on a hedge and play around. And I think from 1954 to 1970, I think I attended every East-West game with Papa Warren. We might have missed one in there. I mean, I saw Dick Butkus when he gave us 4 extra points. He made 2 bad centers. Nobody knows this. Sent it over the punter's head. I saw Ernie Davis play his last football game before he tragically died of leukemia. I love the Shriners. My mother, on the other hand, didn't like them quite as much because during the 50s, around Christmas time, Papa and Mama would be over at the house in Piedmont. They'd all drive up in these cars and convertibles, and they'd have instruments and the fezzes, and they'd serenade, and they'd have a Santa Claus and throw candy, and someplace there may have been a Bloody Mary or two had been consumed. Because much to my mother's chagrin, every year a line would form at the downstairs bathroom, and let's just say, like all men, the Shriners weren't too specific. But they were good-natured and jolly fellows, and they were always welcome. I was 26 and living in New York when Papa Warren died. As a teenager, I spent summers in D.C. with him and Mama Warren. We duck hunted with one of your fellow Masons up at Wally Lynn's ranch in Colusa. We spent time together every Christmas when our family would all get together. He had 16 grandchildren and 6 children. And we'd hold Christmas Eve or Christmas Day up at the ranch. And I'm from St. Helena, where Craig is from. We call it the Lazy J. And Papa Warren would love to come there. He'd stay at Ben Swig's penthouse here on the top of the Fairmont Hotel, and we'd shoot pool in there. He was not very good at that, but we had a lot of just ordinary things like this. But I think this is a good time maybe to dispel a popular myth. Many people say that Earl Warren changed with the times, that he learned over time, and he was able to mature, and that he gained from experience. That may be true, but you couldn't prove it by Christmas that we knew, because each year, Honey Bear, his daughter, would call up around 11 o'clock to the ranch and say, "We're on our way, we'll be there by 1 or 1:30. And then her son Willie or my Uncle John Daly, there were 3 or 4 cars, and they would drive on up, and Papa Warren was just a terrible backseat driver, and he'd be giving directions to everybody. And sure enough, and this was back when we used to have rain and fog in the wintertime, and our ranch is 5 miles from town, a mile up a dirt road. And every year around 3:30, 4 o'clock, the phone would ring, and it'd be some farmer saying, "Well, the governor's lost. We got him here again." So he didn't learn too much on those things. But speaking of Christmas, one of my favorite Christmases, I was about 19 or 20, and it was the 60s, and I'm at Cal, and there wasn't anything I didn't know at that age, and fortunately I was willing to share my wisdom with my grandfather. And so since he loved to read, one Christmas I gave him Eldridge Cleaver's A Soul on Ice. Well, it upset the whole family apple cart. My uncle's yelling at me, "How dare you insult the Chief Justice," and do all this stuff. But Papa Warren wasn't. We had a very special relationship. And so he read the book, and his review, he said, "I understand the man's anger. What a shame that our generations and past generations had generated such rage. But how can you respect a man who uses such bad language?" That was what he really focused on, was Eldridge Cleaver's language. He taught us the awesome power of respect. He shut me up good one time. Again, it's in the 60s, and I was ranting and raving, as we did back there, about our corrupt, neo-revisionist, fascist pig society that, in those days at Cal, we were low on brains but high on cliches, probably some other things. But he told me a story. He said, "I was like you, Jeff, when I was out of law school, and I was working in the DA's office, and everybody was corrupt. The city council was corrupt, the sheriff was corrupt. I was through with the law, and I was going to resign. And I had to do one thing, and I forget what he had to take something over to the Chief Justice of the state of California, which was in San Francisco. They were in Alameda County in the DA's office. And I'll call it a brief. I don't know what it was. And he said, so he's looking at me. He said, and so I go over there, and I go into the office, and the secretary opens the door, and there's an office that's as big as a football field, and at the other end of the office is the Chief Justice desk. And he gets up from behind that desk, and he walks around, and he walks all the way up to where I am, and he sticks out his hand and says, "How do you do, Mr. Warren? How can I help you?" And he said that one handshake just changed my opinion about human nature and the possibilities that we had here. And so he didn't quit the law, and that one sign of dignity just really had a big effect on Papa Warren. He, actually, speaking of handshakes, and I think that handshake changed history, Thurgood Marshall always used to, I would go back to Washington, I got to meet all those people, eat dinner with them, and Thurgood Marshall always used to love to tell a story. He was Justice Marshall before he was on the court, was the lead counsel for the NC2A in Brown versus Board of Education. So in '53, when Papa Warren got appointed, Marshall says, "I'm walking down the hallway there, and there's a man mopping the floor. And I go over to him, and I ask him, 'What do you think about this Warren feller?' And this guy says to me, he says, 'Well, I tell you what, when he came in here a couple weeks ago, I was right here in the same place, and he walked the length of the hall, and he came over and stuck out his hand and said, "My name's Warren. What's yours? And so if you do anything bad to him, I'll kill you." I guess I can say this. As an aside, they did a documentary about 1990. It actually got nominated for an Academy Award called Super Chief. And the screening was up at the Fairmont Hotel. And so the night before, they had a champagne party. And Justice Marshall says, "He had that gravelly voice and get like this. I hope you don't think it's implied, but this is where he was talking. He goes, 'Jeff, this is champagne. I'm not a champagne guy. I want some wild turkey. We got to get some wild turkey.' So I go downstairs. I give Bill, the doorman, $20, and he comes back with a pint of wild turkey. And Justice and I finished it off, and much to the chagrin of Sissy, his wife. She was not too pleased. But they were great little personal things there. So anyway, Papa Warren gave us many joyous moments. I have fond memories of sitting in bed with him back in D.C. We'd watch the Friday night fights and eat chocolate cake and drink cocoa. We went duck hunting. Sometimes in the morning we get up at 4 o'clock, go duck hunting, and come down to a 49er game. That same day we went with the clerks to baseball games in D.C. and was really lucky as a kid. I mean, we got to sit at the dinner table. Would have like Cronkite and Severide and Everett Bennett Williams and Muskie and all these brilliant men, usually, and sometimes their wives, but talking about the great events of the day. And one time, he took me to a Senators game, and they were playing the Kansas City Athletics, and the manager for the Kansas City Athletics was Hank Bauer, and Hank had been a Yankee, if you remember, and Papa Warren loved baseball, and one of his friends, he had all these different types of friends, was Toots Shore, who was kind of a great restaurateur and a little bit of a mobster, and they used to drink up there at Toots Shore's, and he'd drink with Mantle and Bauer and Barrett and all these guys. So Bauer invites Papa Warren and I into the dugout. I'm 14 years old. This is pretty cool, and he gives me a baseball bat. And the umpire comes over and says, "No civilians in the dugout. You have to leave." So Hank Bauer gets up on the step and goes, "Good going, ump. You just threw the Chief Justice of the United States out of the game." There were so many good times, but I remember some bad times too. I remember the hurt. You know, there was a lot of hurt. In the late 60s, he wrote 2 letters, only 2, for Bolt Law School, for 2 friends of mine who he knew personally for various reasons. And neither one of them got accepted. They're both successful attorneys today, and it really hurt Papa Warren's feelings. And I was mad, but Papa Warren just said, you know, that just shows that the university's unfailingly fair. And right after that, Bob Sproul had asked him to donate some money, and he gave $500. In those days, he was making $35,500 a year, and he gave $500 to Cal. It was I just never forgot that, because unlike me, he was never petty. He was never vengeful, and I always wondered where he got that. I'd like to read you a little passage from a letter that was written in 1948 by his Aunt Anna. And this was probably a letter Papa Warren was running as vice president with Truman in 48. So this is probably a letter to understand if there was any, it's quite long, skeletons in the closet. You know, this would have been a vetting kind of thing. So this story is about Matthias, Papa Warren's father, who was a little boy. He wanted to buy a christening dress for his younger brother, Henry. So these are Anna's words. Matt had no money. He heard that they bought rags in town 5 miles away. He picked up all the rags he could find, washed the dirty ones, and walked 5 miles into town to sell them. He returned with enough material to make 2 dresses, and with the material were also 2 new bars of soap. Mother, that would be Papa Warren's grandmother, could hardly keep from crying. Why had he not bought something for himself instead of soap for her? Matt said, "But Mother, I used up your soap to wash the rags." So class was in the genes. They just had it. And that is the gift that he left all of us who are fortunate enough to have been in his orbit. The lesson was simple. All that matters is characters. It doesn't matter how much money, doesn't matter how much money one makes, whether one is black or white, what school one attended. It's character. And a man's character is determined by his, Papa Warren would say, is determined by his refusal to lie. Not just tell falsehoods, but being true to thine own self and at all times under all situations. Men like Papa Warren and Mellon and McBride and Sproul, these Californians that just sort of built this state in the 60s, the whole lot of them were not into situational ethics. They did their duty. It was just as simple as that. And I think that's a legacy that Papa Warren really left his family. I'll let Ed Cray and Jim Newton and the other experts discuss Brown and school prayer reapportionment, Miranda Map et al. But he did a lot of those things, especially when we think about the coddling of criminals and so forth, as they said, you know, putting the handcuffs on the police and coddling the criminals. Here, Papa Warren had been a killer prosecutor, but he did what he felt he had to do because that was his duty. And he was vilified for that. There was a impeach Earl Warren sign up in Vallejo on the way that we had to go by every time we went up to the ranch. In fact, there was a essay contest, $1,000 for whoever wrote the best essay on why Earl Warren should be impeached. He always suggested Mama Warren should write it so we could keep the money in the family. One drunk farmer still calls me at midnight every once in a while. He says, "I hate your grandfather and I hate you." And he just hangs up. He was hated and it hurt him, but unlike the rest of us, you know, he never caved in. I don't really know how he did it. I still wake up nights crying sometimes, not as often as I used to, but just thinking about how we as a country let him down, and certainly in various issues how we as a family must have let him down. I'm in awe, and I don't know where he, you know, drew his strength, but before he died on a Sunday. On Thursday, Jim Pop and I went. My father flew out from California, and I flew down took the train down from New York And we went in the hospital room. Papa Warren liked poetry, and he liked the manly Robert Service, Rudyard Kipling, Henley, that kind of poetry. And he wanted to read this one poem, and it's called The Explorer by Rudyard Kipling. Now, it's a long poem, and I don't have time to go into it here, so I'm going to give you a little synopsis and then read the last bit. But the poem, it's a story about an explorer, and I think this is insightful because he's the first one over the mountains. The protagonist is aware that he's a trailblazer, but that those who come after him haven't a clue of the hardships he endured, and that they're going to take all the credit and develop the land, and never once, give this first explorer his due. So these are the last words I heard from Papa Warren's lips. It's the end of The Explorer. It goes, "Something hidden, go and find it. Go and look behind the ranges. Something lost behind the ranges, lost and waiting for you to go. God took care to hide that country till he judged his people ready. Then he chose me for his whisper, and I've found it, and it's yours. Yes, your never, never country. Yes, your edge of cultivation. There was no sense in going further till I crossed the range to see. God forgive me, no, I didn't. It's God's present to our nation. Anybody might have found it, but his whisper came to me." So I'd like to close now. Excuse me, I forgot how. With a little inside baseball. It's the 50th anniversary of the Kennedy assassination. And of course, people are always coming up to me, especially when I was in New York, and they go, "Okay, who really killed President Kennedy?" And how are you supposed to answer that? So what I finally started doing was I just kind of look around and I say, "Well, he told me not to tell anybody, but I guess I could tell you." At any rate, he's going to get a lot of criticism. They're going to talk about how corrupt the commission was and so forth. Couple things. One, there's nothing in his history that shows he could be bought for any reason on anything, or that he would corrupt anything at all. And two, and I'm working on a thing to try to get this out, but if you knew the relationship between he and Jack Kennedy and President Kennedy and Mrs. Kennedy, they were true friends. They liked each other. They respected each other. There's letters that exist where Mrs. Kennedy talks about how Papa Warren sustained President Kennedy and how much President Kennedy loved Papa Warren. And, they had dinner the Wednesday night before the president was assassinated at the White House. So I'm going to, read from one short letter here. It's in handwriting, so it's a little bit hard to do. But this is from Mrs. Kennedy to Papa Warren, and it's dated December 15th, 1964. "Dear Mr. Chief Justice, it's 2 days since I sat next to you at the dinner for President Kennedy Library, which you made such an extraordinary effort to attend. I shall never forget. Some people didn't get there because of the weather, but you did. Talking to you made so many things churn inside me again, but I mustn't think about that now. Seeing you also made me remember that Secretary McNamara told me that he had been to your office this fall, and you had told him that you had no picture of Jack. None of the people he was closest to have pictures of him, but I have the picture of him taken at Amherst, October 1963, when he spoke in memory of Robert Frost. It seemed such an appropriate picture to give to you. You, he, and Robert Frost were the 1960 inaugural. There will never be another inauguration like that. Now only we are left. Please accept it as at Christmas time with thoughts that I cannot express. I do not know you that well, though I feel I know you profoundly, but I will always love you because I know you love President Kennedy. Affectionately, Jacqueline Kennedy." So that's how close they were, and I think when you're close to somebody like that, you don't not find their killer, and he did. And I want to thank you all for the pleasure to come here and have a chance to share some memories of somebody that we all have something in common with. So thank you very much.